Welcome to Here's What I Learned, a podcast for building a hustle-free, wildly successful coaching business. I'm your host, Jackie Hayes, launch strategist and certified online business manager with an obsession for superheroes and a thorough understanding of chicken math. Join my guests and I as we explore the ins and outs of building a feminist coaching business that embraces both mindset and strategy. Now on to this week's episode. Today I have Asha Wilkerson here with me. Thank you so much for being on Here's What I Learned. Can you tell everybody about yourself?
Of course, yeah. Thank you for inviting me. My name is Asha Wilkerson. I'm a California-based attorney who likes to be location independent, but I am trained and licensed in the state of California. I am a business attorney, employment attorney, turned business coach. So now the bulk of what I do is teaching folks, business owners, entrepreneurs, how to, or teaching them about law so that they know what to do in their own businesses and also know when they need to get help and call in that expert.
Excellent. And at the start of my episodes, I like to do a rapid fire question so that everybody gets to know you a little bit. And so this season, for season 3, the question is going to be if you were to be stranded on a deserted island, just yourself.
I like where this is going.
You're only there for 2 weeks, so it's not like a life or death situation. Somebody will be coming to get you, but there's no cell service. There's no internet. What 3 things would you take with you?
Goodness. Okay. So this might be cheating, but I would take my Kindle with books that I've previously downloaded. So even though I can't update, I would hopefully have enough on there to keep me entertained for 2 weeks. Let's see. What I would take my journal. Definitely. That's a part of my daily practice is to write. And I'm thinking between music and like filtered water, which one is more like
yeah. We're just going to assume the island has wonderful, pristine water that you can drink, and so you can have your music with.
Okay, sounds good. Thank you for that. I appreciate that.
No problem. Do I remember correctly? I think I have seen on your Instagram lots of dancing. Am I remembering that?
Yeah.
So music is going to be a big one.
Yeah, I like to dance Cuban salsa. I like to dance to Afrobeat a little bit. I'm not yet one of those people who can like just free form and flow and like just move that way. Like I need a little bit of structure, but not too much stuff I can improvise on. And I like that partner dancing as well.
There you go. Well, if you're on a deserted island, you have plenty of time to practice while nobody's watching.
Exactly. Like truly no one's watching. Yeah.
Exactly. Now, as you said in your introduction, you are California-based, so I kind of want to preface this entire episode with states have different laws, which I'm sure would state, and so everybody should probably check with their own state before they implement anything.
Right.
You're most familiar with California, but there are some things that are pretty universal.
Yes.
And I want to kick that off with why somebody, a coach, who has a pretty streamlined business, it's solopreneur usually to start out with, why they should legally form a business, an LLC or something along those lines.
Right. It's a great question. So at the most basic level, it affords legal protection. So if you were coaching in a public space, like you have your own office someplace, or you're hosting events and someone comes and trips on the way in, or, they stub their toe in your office, then having insurance and that legal protection protects your personal assets from any potential liabilities in the business. So that's the biggest one that attorneys talk about. But I also try and look forward into the future. So what is it that you want to do with your business? As an entrepreneur, you have a unique opportunity to make a lot of money, and you have that opportunity to pass that on to whoever you want to, whether that means that you're selling the business, you are leaving it for your children, or you're giving your children the opportunity to sell it when you're no longer here and able to do anything with it. So businesses, business entities, LLCs, and corporations are tools that can be used to pass on wealth. Now, of course, you want to have your insurance and things like that. And there comes a threshold if you're just kind of dabbling in it, or it's a hobby and you're not quite sure, it's probably not the right time to form an LLC because it does take some responsibility. You got to file the right tax forms. You got to do the accounting. You want to do that anyway as a business owner. So there is more responsibility that comes along with it, but there's also a lot more opportunity as well.
I had never thought about that, the ability to be able to pass the assets down
Mm-hmm.
to your children or your grandchildren or things along those lines.
Right.
So is it similar to like passing down a house or something along those lines?
Yeah, similar, right? And so one thing a lot of people think about is, well, I don't want to force my kids to go into the same business as me. And I tell this story about my childhood, one of my childhood best friends, his dad was a dentist and his dad's dad was a dentist. And so his grandfather started this practice. When his dad went to dental school, the grandfather sold the dental practice to the dad, and then the dad sold it to my friend. And I was like, wow, that's definitely one way to pass down this legacy business. And it wasn't just for free. I mean, the sons had to buy it from the fathers, but also if the sons didn't want to be a dentist, they still had this business that they could sell. And then that helped to fund, retirement for the dad who would pass the business on, right? So legally in the States, you cannot sell a sole proprietorship. A sole proprietorship is just an extension of you. It's your personal asset. So you can't you can't sell. You might be able to sell them piece by piece, but it's not going to have the same valuation. Whereas if you build up a business reputation, people know the name, even if it's not profitable, but has a good reputation, people will buy a business so that they don't have to start it from scratch. And even if you don't, like I talked to someone the other day who was an interior designer, built the business herself, was a solo, and she got tired of it. And it didn't even occur to her to sell it because she thought, oh, it's just my baby. It's just my thing. I created it. But she had a book of clients. She had relationships with the vendors. It was a legal entity, and somebody who was coming in after her who didn't have the same amount of experience, or maybe someone who wanted to take clients on in her territory, probably would have paid good money because she had already built that foundation and done the legwork for it.
Yeah. That was something until recently that I was completely unaware of, is that like there's entire like websites out there about selling your online business. When you get to a certain point, you're like, I just don't want to do this anymore.
Right.
Instead of just stopping,
right,
try listing it and see if if somebody would buy it. So
yeah.
So what is the difference between some of the different forms of business? Like you mentioned the LLC and the corporation.
Yeah, so generally speaking, most states have the sole proprietorship is an option. It's not an official type of business. It's just something like I decided I'm going to start selling cupcakes today, and now I'm calling myself a business. It's a sole proprietorship, right? Other states, or most states, also have limited liability companies and corporations. Some have something in between, like limited partnerships, limited liability partnerships. There are some rules about which kinds of businesses can choose which particular entity, but generally speaking, LLCs and corporations are universal. So an LLC is most similar to a sole proprietorship. You file the formal paperwork. You could be the sole member owner of that LLC, or you could bring in business partners, and it gets taxed in what tax attorneys and accountants call flow-through taxation. So that means that whatever taxable revenue you have in the business, you are paying for it personally through your personal tax return, right? It gets attached to you. That liability gets attached to you personally. Of course, you can pay for it with business funds, but you're filing the tax returns together, personal and business. For a corporation, there's more separation, and the corporation itself files its own tax return. So think about like Google, Facebook, right? These are big corporations. You can also be the sole owner of a corporation, and the corporation files its own tax return. And then whatever you have paid yourself, you're putting yourself on payroll and you're paying regular employment taxes. And the differences between the two is that depending on what else you have going on in your life, corporation might be a better strategy because you can choose to have the business pay more in taxes, so you're reducing your own taxable liability. Whereas the LLC, you don't get that option. Everything that's taxable is attached to you personally.
How would a person go about deciding which one is the best for them? How do you usually coach people on that? Yeah,
so I tell them to talk to an attorney and also a CPA or a tax advisor, because, if you have a couple other businesses, you want to take that into consideration. What is that going to mean for your taxable liability? I still have student loans that I'm paying off. So I chose to do a professional corporation. For me, in California, if you're a licensed professional attorney, doctor, accountant, you have to have a professional corporation or a sole proprietorship. LLC is not an option. Because I wanted to control how much I am paying in student loans, I decided that I want to choose a corporation so that I can decide how much to pay myself on payroll, and then the corporation can absorb, the bigger tax liability as opposed to me, right? So
Right.
it just depends on what those factors are. Also, whether or not you're thinking about getting investors, what kind of investors. If you have a company that you're thinking about taking public, like, I don't know, Uber went public and, whatever, right? So those VCs are going to be more likely to invest in a corporation because they get some shares. It's also a way to raise money from the public. If that's not something that you're interested in, then maybe an LLC would be a better opportunity or a better vehicle. So there isn't a right or a wrong answer. It's choosing the right vehicle for what your vision is for your business and your future.
Okay. Well, I'm glad you mentioned when you brought up the student loans. I'm like, oh, as my business starts to make more revenue and I'm an LLC, I'm like, ew, that's not going to help my income repayment plan whatsoever.
Right. Yeah, exactly. Right. Or if you own, like, some people own investment properties, right? And they're continuing to bring in money. And so you're looking at your total revenue for all of the streams of income that you have, right? Or what you think you might have. And then choosing something that I always tell people to look, not just where you are now, but where do you want to be 5 years from now, and choose the vehicle that's going to help get you there.
Okay. Now, if somebody has, say, like myself, an LLC, and they think, oh, maybe a corp would have been a better route, or it will be, is it hard to transition from one to the other?
Yeah, so it depends on the state that you live in. So in California, it takes a couple steps. You have to notify the Secretary of State that, one, you have the authority to change the entity type. Here's what it was. Here's what it's going to be. And then I don't actually know how long the process takes. I imagine like a couple months to actually get it filed and reviewed by the Secretary of State. And complication depends on, how many people are involved, how well the operating agreement is set up for the LLC to give the owner permission to be able to make these moves, right? So it's more paperwork intensive. If there's multiple owners that have changed hands a couple times, then it's going to be a lot more complicated. So it's not impossible. One advantage of changing from one entity to the next is that you get to keep your tax ID number. You get to keep your same bank accounts. You don't have to start over and all of that process that it took to set up your payment account and to get your tax ID and to go to the bank and to get insurance in this name, right? You just have to let everybody know, hey, same number, just different change in status. If you don't have all of that stuff set up, or if it would be easier to transfer the assets or the accounts from one entity to another, then it might be worth it just to start a new entity and close down the old one, right? But then you'd have to, of course, notify everybody, get a new tax ID, and do that legwork.
Right. Now, I know there are options to, use online services to file an LLC or a corp. What do you recommend that people do?
Yeah, I always recommend talking to an attorney, because with things like LegalZoom, they're going to ask you the same questions that you fill out online, but there isn't feedback. So the benefit of talking to an individual who has the experience is that I can ask you the questions that you haven't thought about, like, what do you think you want to do with this business in 5 years? Do you want to be able to pass it on? Okay, what other income do you have? And is this the right entity? What other things are you looking about doing in the future? What are you bringing with you from the past, and things like that? And I always recommend, again, also talking to a CPA or a tax advisor as well to make that decision together based on the advice. The tax preparer is always going to talk to you about taxes. The attorneys are always going to talk to you about the legal side of it, right?
Right.
And if you get someone who has some like business coaching experience as well, then we're really talking about what's the vision for the future. So if you really know what you're doing, I don't think you need something like LegalZoom. Like, if you can get a consultation, you feel confident doing it, just go to the state's website. So then you cut out paying for this middle person, right? And if you feel like you need to pay for the middle person, pay for a human person, or pay for a program that a human has created after you've had that consultation.
Okay. Now, another legal step that business owners should consider are contracts, terms and conditions, things along those lines. What is the difference between a contract and terms and conditions?
So terms and conditions are a type of contract, right? It's really a unilateral contract that says, if you're going to engage with my website, if you're going to buy my product, here's what you need to do, or here's what you need to know. And by you clicking this box that says that you agree to this, then it becomes a unilateral contract where I'm agreeing and I'm getting that product or that service in return for that. A contract can encompass more things, right? So it might have some terms of agreement. It might, if we're coaching, it might say what I expect of you as an individual, but it's also going to cover, or can cover, depending on what you put on it, payment terms, late payment fees. What if we decide not to work together? What if we have 3 months left on our contract and one of us wants to cancel? What if you're a no-show? What if, we're doing a collaboration together and somebody gets hurt or something breaks? Who's responsible for that? Whether or not insurance is required to collaborate together. So it's all of these things. A contract can be all encompassing. And you can have multiple contracts for different agreements or for the same agreement so that it's broken down a little bit easier to find the terms, because you do want to know what's actually in the contract, right? Instead of just signing it and hoping for the best. But terms and conditions are really about what are the terms to be able to use or engage with this product or service that I have. So terms and conditions are typically on websites, or every time you update your Facebook app, every time you update your, I don't know, my photo app even updates now, and you have to click, do you agree to these terms? Like, yeah, okay, whatever. No one really reads it, but they've gotten your consent from there.
Mm-hmm. Yep. So if a coach was, say, working one-on-one with an individual or was doing a group coaching program, would you say that a contract is probably their best route and not just relying on a terms and conditions that somebody checks?
Yeah, absolutely. So a contract you can customize a little bit more. I expect you, or you can't, require someone to show up in a good mood, but you can remind them that they have hired you for coaching and that this is the kind of attitude you encourage them to approach the situation with. In a contract, you can also guarantee that there are no guarantees in terms of outcome, right? Don't guarantee that you're going to produce a certain result unless you can really deliver on that result, right? So usually what I'm saying in coaching is that you will have certain number of sessions. This is the kind of work we'll engage in. These are the tools that will be used. And also, I expect you, client, to put in the work. And while there's no guarantees, I can promise that I'm going to deliver this service to try and get to the outcome that we want to get to. So we get into trouble when we say, we'll double your revenue, unless you can really guarantee you're going to double the revenue, right? Because so much stuff is out of your control. You can provide the method and the mental coaching, mindset coaching, and things like that. But if the client doesn't do what they're supposed to do, you don't want to be on the hook because they didn't get the results that you promised them.
And you mentioned the terms and conditions on websites, and I don't think a lot of people realize all the legal things that need to exist on your website. What are the bare minimums that people need to have?
Yeah. So a privacy policy and terms and conditions, especially if you have a website where people are logging in. So if it's something like a Dubsado or a HoneyBook where people have their own kind of portal, then Dubsado and HoneyBook probably have their own privacy agreement. If you've created something yourself, then you want to say, you need to tell people what you're using the data for, what data you're collecting and what you're using it for. That of course, if there's a login, then you need to tell people. If you're taking credit card information, you need to tell people, right? Whether you plan to sell it, don't plan to sell it. If you sell it, who do you think you would be selling it to? That kind of thing. The terms and conditions. So that was privacy. Terms and conditions say how you expect the website to be used, right? If it's a gaming website, you're going to, or some kind of a chat website, then we expect this kind of conduct in the community. If it's just a website where people are finding out information about you, then it's a lot more basic and just saying, nothing on this webpage is binding. This information is informational only. It's not considered advice. You need to meet with somebody, that kind of a thing. It's setting the expectation, because it's much easier to do that up front. And if someone has a misguided expectation, you can refer them back to the document that was clearly visible instead of having to make an argument and waste time or money, proving that you were correct in the first place.
And you can kind of do the same with your contracts. If somebody has an issue with something, you can always be like, well, Absolutely. This right here is what you signed. Let's review this again. So.
Yeah. And as an attorney, right, one of the first things that I ask for when someone comes to me and says, well, I didn't get what I was promised, I said, okay, let me see the contract. Was it written in the contract that you would be able to get a refund? What were the terms? And if it's written in there that they would not be able to get a refund, case is dead in the water, right? We have no room to move. If it's not written in there and we can make an argument that one party has not lived up to the expectations that they said that they would deliver, then we have a case from there. So it is that protection that stops things before they get started.
And again, there are all kinds of contract templates out there on the web that you can download. What is the benefit to working with an attorney directly yourself over downloading the contract templates or the privacy policy templates?
Yeah, absolutely. So the attorney should know what the most updated terms are and how they're stated. They can also guide you through and ask you about different scenarios. So the benefit of having someone who's been doing this for a number of years is that they've probably seen more scenarios and situations than you have. You may have more industry specific knowledge. And so you're really working together to build something that really fits and is tailored to your business. So for example, I just did a contract for someone who's opening up a staging business. And so on my end, I'm like, okay, you're working with different vendors to bring furniture in. What happens if one of the vendors cancels the contract? And I'm thinking probably you want 30 days notice, right? And then here are the penalties we can set up. She's like, oh, well, industry standard is 7, right? So I'm like, okay, you know what, but that worked. That's the industry standard. But then there's also, I added in a penalty that if they cancel later, then they don't get a refund, and they are paying for any costs that my client incurred relying on the delivery of the furniture or of the service that she signed up for. With a boilerplate template contract, you're not going to have that customization because it's not customized. It's just general contract terms. So if you know what you're looking for and know how to tailor it, fine, go ahead. But, I always think that it's worth it to pay for that advice upfront because it's always cheaper than paying to fix it later on. And it's just the cost of doing business, right? You got to have we call it the Fab 5, your attorney, your accountant, your business coach, a mentor, and a really good friend. You got to have all of those to build your business.
Yeah, that is very, very true. When it comes to finding an attorney, I think with it being an online world out there, is it important or necessary for you to find somebody in your state in order to move forward? Or are you able to work with people who maybe live in a different state and licensed in your state? What's the parameters there?
Yeah, so it depends on what it is. So I will sometimes write contracts for folks who are in different states, but I don't do business formation anymore for folks who are in different states. Because you have to look up exactly what the rules are. And so as the consumer, as the client, you want someone who knows that state's law inside and out, right? Contract terms are pretty universal, but each state might have a different default percentage on late payments, right? They might have different rules about going to mediation, things like that, but they're pretty universal. On the business formation side, like New York, for whatever reason, still has a requirement that you have to publish in a newspaper that you're starting a business. Right. Totally antiquated. And I was like, you know what?
So there's hardly any newspapers left. So
exactly. That part. Like, I'm not doing it. California doesn't have a requirement like that. And so for me to find, figure out how to publish this notice in the newspaper on behalf of my client, I'm like, you know what? It's not worth it. It's not worth it for me. And you want someone who has those connections and ties already. So it depends on what it is. But I think also more than that is someone who has experience in your industry, because then they know like, okay, well, coaching, this usually comes up, or in health coaching, these are the typical things that come up, and they will understand how to deal with HIPAA, even if you're not a licensed professional. But if you want to get, like I was working on an agreement with somebody who is a health and nutrition coach, but she was encouraging folks to get blood work done, right? And like food sensitivity testing. And if it was something beyond the basics, then she was going to consult with somebody who is a licensed professional in that area. So we had to figure out what agreement and consent and release forms do the clients have to fill out so that my client, the health nutrition coach, could forward the results or send the results up to get more expert advice and then be able to give them back to the client. So, in the legal world, there are certain things like, if you're doing a contract or if you're doing intellectual property, there's just industry specific knowledge. So it's really good. So whatever your industry you're in, ask around to your colleagues about what attorneys they have used or what CPAs they have used to help them, or bookkeepers get started in their business, and would they recommend them? And then I would usually go from there.
Okay. Okay. Now, I know something that most people weren't thinking, oh, I need to consult with an attorney about this, but
Hmm.
that is the contractor versus employee.
Yeah.
Um, but before I get into the law regarding all of that, I kind of want to touch base. I was listening to, I think it was episode 39 of your Transcend podcast where you were
Hmm.
touching a little bit about this. And I would love for you to share that mindset that you were talking about, which was the pride of being somebody who is employing somebody else.
Yeah. Yeah. I think it's such a beautiful thing. I mean, now California's minimum wage, I think in San Francisco just went up to $17 or 16.95 or something like that, right? Because San Francisco really wants to be the first city to make minimum wage like $20 an hour or something like that, right? And so for small business owners, that's a lot, and I think our society, because the system we're in, capitalism, right? We are built on paying workers a lower wage so we can keep as much money as possible as business owners. That's not a value judgment. That's capitalism. That's the way that the system is designed, right? But it is so amazing to know that you are paying somebody a wage, that you have built up a business and that you need help, which is great. And you are now putting money in somebody else's pocket. And then that money in their pocket affects the people around them, affects them directly, the people around them, and it just has this trickle down effect. And so I think it's really, really empowering to see yourself as somebody who can help your community. As a business owner, you get to choose who you want to employ. Right? You get to pick people that you like. You get to pick people who work hard and add value to your business. And that is by no means a small feat. That's such an empowering place to be and such a powerful place to be, right? So it comes with great responsibility, but it is also amazing to be able to step into that spot and have that responsibility. So, instead of thinking about, oh my gosh, it's going to be this expense, just flip the mindset about it and see how you feel about getting ready to hire people.
And when it's time to hire somebody, they have the option of going with a contract worker or
Mm-hmm.
bringing on an employee. What are some of the legal differences between the two?
Yeah, it's a really good question. And I do actually advise people do a lot of research on this or talk to an attorney to explain it, because there are legal differences between independent contractors and employees. So an independent contractor typically has their own business, works for a number of people. They're not supervised in their work. So the best example is always like if you are building a house and you hire a plumber to do the work. Right? The plumber has their own industry skill and knowledge, their own tools. You're telling them you want a toilet, but you're not telling them how to build the toilet, how to install the toilet, how to connect the water, right? They are using their own knowledge and their own tools to do it. An employee, by contrast, is someone who's necessary to run the business. And because of that, you are telling them, how do you want this process to go? How do you want these documents to be drafted? How do you want this service to be delivered? So contractors typically work on the business. So an accountant could be a contractor, a coach could be a contractor, a marketing professional could be a contractor. Employees typically work in the business. So I have a law firm. So if I need to hire additional legal help and I hire a paralegal, I should be hiring them as an employee, because paralegal can't work without being in a law firm or being under the supervision of an attorney. That's what I do. They're doing law, and I'm hiring them to do that. They should be an employee. But the person working on my marketing, they have their own business. They're working for multiple companies. And I might be telling them what I want my goals and metrics to be, but I'm not telling them how to go about and do the marketing for my company.
Now, once you have a person onboarded and you're working with them, there's different ways you actually need to treat them.
Mm-hmm.
One of the conversations that comes up within the online business management groups that I am in is like the conversation of performance reviews.
Mm-hmm.
If they're contractors, you're going to have some issues if you start doing performance reviews.
Right.
That's something that you do with an employee. And then
Mm-hmm.
if you part ways with the contractor and not very amicably, if you've done performance reviews, they could say, hey, no, I was an employee because you were doing X, Y, or Z. What are some of the things that people might need to be careful about besides performance reviews with, say, contractors?
Yeah. So with contractors, you're not determining what hours they're working. or like from 9 a.m. to 5 p.m. You're not saying that, right? Because the contractors are typically in charge of their own schedule, and it's to get the work done whenever they can get it done. Unless, the building's only open from 9 to 5, and so they need to be there, from these particular hours, right? But you're not supervising them or controlling their schedule. You can't tell a contractor who they can and cannot work for. So you can't retain them exclusively. That would be an employee. Contractors, you don't have to worry about overtime wages or them working more than 8 hours in a day or 40 hours in a week. California has a daily minimum, daily overtime. Not every state has a daily overtime. But if there's an employee that's working more than 8 hours in a day, then they are legally entitled to overtime. If it's an employee, they're entitled to sick leave in California. If they're a full-time employee, they're entitled to some kind of medical benefits, right? Things like that. So if you are going to hire a contractor, make sure that that's really what you want. So there's a lot of autonomy that is in place with contractors. Contractors also contractor. Contracts are for a particular period of time or for a particular project. So I need you to, hiring you to help me, build out Dubsado, my CRM or something like that, right? That's a particular project that may also have a number of hours associated with it. But when that project is done, our relationship is done. With an employee, it's an indefinite relationship. There's no end date. And, most states are at will. California is at will, so they can quit whenever they want to, or you can fire them whenever you want to fire them. But a contractor, you are working with them for the duration of the contract unless they have breached or broken some agreement or term within that contract.
One of the things that came up on a Facebook thread and one of the groups I'm in was that it was a company that does like podcasting, editing, things along those lines. And they have a bunch of contractors working for them, like virtual assistants. And they said, we need to come up with a vacation policy because people are all taking time. And I'm like, wait a minute, they're all contractors.
Right.
They've already told you what their vacation policy is. They come to you with that. So, so that's another thing of like, you can't control necessarily their time off either. They're a contract worker. So.
Right. And it's important for people to think about how much control do they want, right? So people start out with contractors because it's cheaper. You don't have to worry about payroll and all that stuff. You don't have to worry about taxes, and it's easier to get started. But the penalties for doing it incorrectly, especially in California like its own country, right? So it could be between $5,000 and like $25,000 per violation, right? If you have, and how do you get multiple violations? You have 3 contractors and they should have known that they should be employees, and you haven't paid them properly, given them their sick time or their vacation wages, haven't paid them overtime. And now you have 3 violations for the same thing, even though it's in one, setting or one situation, right? So, and then on top of that, you have to go back and pay the missed payroll taxes, the missed unemployment, right? And the $5,000 to $3,000 is just the potential penalty. So even if you didn't get hit with any penalties, you have to go back and pay what was owed to the worker and also into those systems like unemployment, workers' comp, things like that. That you missed before. Another thing too is if you have people doing physical work for you, and you've misclassified them, they call it as a contractor, not an employee, and they get hurt, and then what happens when you go to the doctor? Like, I have a bad back. They ask me all the time, did you hurt yourself doing work? I'm like, no, I'm just got bad bones, whatever, right? Bad muscles, right? But they ask me every single time, and it's not, someone could say something not trying to get you in trouble, but because it's just the truth, right? And then the doctor is supposed to report that. It's supposed to go through workers' comp, and you don't have workers' comp because you didn't have employees. And now it opens up a whole situation, and that's how you get on the radar screen.
Okay. I know one of your messages is this idea of being a business owner to build a legacy. Can you share more of that with me?
Absolutely. So I believe that entrepreneurship is one of the fastest ways to build wealth, right? All of us want more money. We want to change our economic situations, right? It doesn't mean that we're greedy for that. It just means that we want a little bit more, and we're certainly entitled to go chase that dream. So just what I was talking about a little bit earlier, being able to retire and sell, retire and pass on the business, and your child can sell, right? oftentimes we start our businesses because we're passionate about the thing that we're passionate about, the thing we've created the business around. And we don't think about how can we really monetize this and really use it as this tool to build wealth. And I think especially as women, that's not a conversation that we're having because, we're relatively new to being economic providers. I mean, I was going to say 30 years ago, but the 70s was 50 years ago at this point, right? We still had to have, a woman still had to have a man's name, either her husband or her father's name, to open up a bank account or to get a credit card, right? So just these tools of empowerment, one, to be able to generate your own income, but two, there are things you can write off. When you have children, you can hire your kids and there's a reduction of taxes because they're not paying taxes. And then you're only paying a minimum amount of taxes. Certain taxes don't apply when you're hiring your children if you have an LLC or if you're a sole proprietor, right? Mm-hmm. You can, another client of mine decided to go back to school. That's going to help her business. She's using her business to pay for tuition, so she doesn't have to take out loans personally for it. And even if she did, she could still reimburse herself for that. If you need vehicles that you're using for the business, if you want to set up your own retirement account, retirement fund, you can open up a multiple different retirement funds essentially through your business and contribute to them that way. It just gives you more options to play this game, this business game, and to build wealth. And the questioning started for me a few years ago when I read The Millionaire Next Door. And it's a little bit out of date now, but it was the majority of the people surveyed, the men had their own businesses. So men had their own businesses. And a lot of times the wives were like stay-at-home wives. They had two kids and never bought a brand new car, and always paid cash and all that stuff, right? But which stuck, so antiquated, that's not my situation right now. But I was just thinking about how most of them were business owners and had an LLC, and they were supporting each other. The husband and the wife were supporting each other in terms of building this business and building this family and community together. And then another client had asked me a few years ago, he's like, all right, Asha, how do I keep my money like all the rich folks do? And I was like, I knew how to start the LLC. I knew how to do the contracts, how to hire employees, but I had not learned yet how business ownership can be this tool that you can use to pass on wealth. So when you look at a lot of the wealthy folks in America, they've run the company, then their children have come and run the company, or they've sold it, things like that. So it's an awesome tool to be able to use.
Is there anything that we didn't cover that you would like to talk about?
I would say in addition to the legal stuff and the businessy stuff is that the mindset is really, really important. The biggest transformations have come for me because I've signed up for mindset coaching or even just therapy or being able to talk with folks about what's coming up. And I'm starting to talk about that a little bit more on my podcast. I felt like I had to just give this legal stuff, just give this business stuff. And so much of it is what you believe that you can do. And the best question you can ask yourself when you come up against a wall is, how do I get through this? To not be stuck or limited by what you see now, but to think about where you're trying to go and then figure out what do you need to get there. So I think that's pretty much it. I think we've covered my philosophy on business and probably life too. And I think that's pretty good.
Where can everybody find you?
I hang out mostly on Instagram. So my handle there is Asha Wilkerson, ESQ. And from there, you can join my mailing list or see what I've got going on IG. I use IG pretty sparingly, but that's the biggest place I hang out. I say that's where you'll find me the most.
And do you have a membership program as well?
I do. Yeah, I have a membership program that's specifically designed for Black and Latinx business owners, service-based business owners that are looking to start the business and build a legacy. But I also have individual coaching that's open and available to everybody. So if you want to check out my website, head to thewilkersonlawoffice.com or connect with me on IG, wherever you feel comfortable.
Great. Thank you so much for being here today.
Thank you.
And that's it for today's episode. Please be sure to share it and leave a review. For show notes and transcripts, visit jackiehayes.me. While you're there, be sure to subscribe to my email list. You'll receive weekly launch strategy tips straight to your inbox, plus access to my launch strategy resource library. Thanks for joining. Until next time, keep on learning.